It's been 50 years since she died at the age of 36, but Marilyn Monroe's shimmering star power remains undiminished by time. And Douglas Kirkland is part of the reason why. He was a young staff photographer for Look magazine in 1961 when he got the plum assignment of a lifetime, a shoot with Marilyn for Look's 25th anniversary edition. Now he's turned that sizzling shoot and his memories of the night into a book, With Marilyn, An Evening, 1961. And Douglas Kirkland is here to tell us about it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. That's me.
Douglas, you've shot just about every celebrity out there, but here it is all these years later, and we're still asking about Marilyn. What is that all about?
Everyone is more interested, I've always found, in Marilyn than all of the others I've photographed. I mean, I've photographed a long list of people through my career. I was at Look for 11 years, then I was later at Life magazine, and it just has gone on. But from that, but Marilyn Monroe seems to hold people's attention more than anyone.
Take us back to 1961. You go to her Beverly Hills home the night before the shoot, and what transpires?
It was a rainy evening, and I was brought in with two of my colleagues from the magazine. And she was actually, it was on Doheny Drive, a small, very small place on Doheny Drive. And you wouldn't imagine it was where a superstar lived. It was like a deluxe hotel room with a little kitchenette at the side.
How did she behave?
She was wonderful. She was not like the Marilyn I expected. She was easy and light and almost playful and very disarming for me.
Whose idea was it to take pictures like this?
It was Marilyn's. You know, what I had in mind and hoped for as a young photographer was to get something really sizzling. But I was almost embarrassed to say that. And we talked about different things, Marilyn, myself, and my two colleagues from the magazine. And she said at the end, I know what we need, Douglas. We need a bed and white silk sheets. Right. A white silk sheet.
And she told everybody else to leave the room, did she?
Well, that was once we got shooting. Let me just finish anyway. And that evening she said, as we were preparing, I want white silk sheets, Frank Sinatra records, and Dom Perignon champagne. So we prepared all of that, and about 4 days later, we were there in the room with all of these things. And of course, naturally, Marilyn was a couple of hours late. Which she was famous for. And
was she flirtatious? I mean, was she...
it's hard to put that in an element just that. She was more than flirtatious. You know, I did not say, Marilyn, turn this way, turn that way. I didn't. She was in the bed. I was looking down on her from up above, and Marilyn made these pictures. I mean, I had everything technically right, and I had it was my Hasselblad and click, 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 like that. But it was Marilyn Monroe who really created these images.
Oh, they're beautiful photographs.
And that's what you see here. And she was very seductive.
I believe it. It looks like it. Douglas Kirkland, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I enjoyed doing this project, and our book is out. And
thanks so much.
Thank you. I mentioned that I've been photographing a lot of movie stars. It just seemed to have a life of its own, and the biggest movie star, of course, of those days, the early 60s, was Marilyn Monroe. And she was, even to think of her name was very exciting, the movies she had made and the magnitude of who she was. It was extraordinary. And Look magazine had a special edition coming out for the 25th year anniversary. And for that, they asked the editors to suggest some ideas. And I, through the editor, suggested photographing various people. And we had the idea of asking Marilyn to show us how she'd like to be remembered 25 years into the future. This is 1961. It was hard to imagine what 25 years into the future would be. It would be 1986. I mean, it seemed like the other end of the rainbow. Anyway, she agreed. I flew from New York to Hollywood, rented a studio, I met her, was with her on 3 different occasions during that period, and incidentally, I really saw 3 different people. It was the first person who was like the girl next door, very un-movie star-like, very easy to be with, laughing easily, very personable. You know, you were there with her. Then there was the second person, the night of the photo session. That was hot. That was sexy. She was huge. She was like an exploding star. She was so bright. And that was the second person. And that was where the photos came from that are fairly well known today. And of course where the book, My Evening with Marilyn, came from. The last person I met was a day later when I went to show her the pictures. And unfortunately, something had gone wrong, even though it was probably only 15 hours after I'd left her after the session, and we'd both been on a high. I got back to her apartment, small apartment here in Hollywood, and went in, and it was dark. She was depressed. It was like a total different person. So all these were all the elements that went into that session for me. You know, there are fairy tale stories about the perfect session that goes without flaws. This wasn't the story of my Marilyn Monroe evening, because I had anxieties, I was nervous, like any young photographer would be. Here I was with what became the biggest star of the century, and I was young, uncertain of myself, and I wanted to get as much as possible. While we'd agreed on her being under the white silk sheets, which became the pictures eventually, I was trying to get an extra idea in. So I got a big long piece of cheesecloth. I figured she could wrap herself in it and lean back. And so when she arrived for the session, I told her about this other idea, and I could tell she was a little cool about it, but nevertheless she agreed to doing it. And we went into the studio. She put on a dress and leaned back into this piece of cloth. She did her best to make it work, and the reality is it didn't work. Now, I learned a lesson from that because I wasn't clearly organized. If I had been more organized, it probably wouldn't have been cheesecloth. One of the things she said, "This is not me. I'm not a cheesecloth kind of girl." And it wasn't properly prepared. It wasn't like on the level of a superstar. It was sort of half together, and that's unfortunate. So I learned a very important lesson. If you expect the best pictures from a superstar, they must be treated like they are a superstar at all times. Later, I put that aside. I was really scared that she might walk out, and that would be the end of the session. Fortunately, she didn't, and we went to our planned idea of Marilyn with nothing on but a pretty transparent white silk sheet. She rolled around in the bed. I had Dom Perignon champagne. She wanted Frank Sinatra records playing, old LPs. Frank Sinatra records were playing, and that was the nature of our evening together. It was like a love affair with the camera between us, and it was very stimulating, not only to me, but I think to Marilyn, and that's why you see what you do in the pictures. It's an excitement, and there's a communication running between the photographer and the subject. Did this just happen, or did I direct it and make it happen? You know, there's one thing I'd say to any young photographer, male or female, if they're photographing the opposite sex. What it really comes down to is being interested in the person you're with. Maybe a big star, or maybe just a friend or somebody you've just met. But you have to really be interested in them. You have to really care about them. And if something looks good in the camera, they have to know that. They have to feel your excitement, because that's what photography is about. Now, Marilyn was incredibly sexy. In simple terms, she just was, and that's who she was. And I let her know what my reaction was, and she sent that back. and it went back and forth between us. That was our communication on that night, and that's why there is a book called An Evening with Marilyn. Okay, the last evening I was with Marilyn, we were together to look through the pictures. And at first she didn't like any of them. And as she looked, she found more that she did like. But ultimately there were a pile to the side that she did not really care for. And I remember the shock at hearing the scissors go snip, snip as she started cutting them up. And as I think of it now, 40 years later, 40 years plus maybe, I realized why she did that, because as a young actress she had been burned so many times by the studios, by the system, and here she was in her mid-30s, she was 36, and she had just had enough. She wanted more control of her career and her life. But at the same time, while she did that, I didn't disagree with her kills because she was sensitive to the pictures. Now, many people have done that irresponsibly after Marilyn's time, but Marilyn knew what she was talking about because she understood photography very well. And however, it is still, I snip, snip, snip. It's a tough sound.